Well, hello, vinyl community. It's Matt. I'm back again for part two of my series with my dad. I hope you have watched part one before you come to part two, because it's going in historical and musical chronological order. So it'd be really behoove you to see part one first, then check out this one, part two. Anyway, we left off last time. We ended that video talking about the onset of early rock and roll, from Elvis to Chuck Berry to Little Richard, Fats Domino, the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly and whatnot. And we had a little discussion about that. And then we ended it specifically with talking about my birth in the early 60s, my younger brother's birth in the early 60s or so. So I thought we'd pick it up at that point. So Dad, I remember in the early 60s, or early to mid 60s, well, I should say early 60s really, is, what I remember you playing around the house is not only your big band stuff, but you might have things like Frank Sinatra. I think I have a Frank album here I'll show in a second, but certainly stuff like Dean Martin. I remember hearing songs being played by Dean. I remember certainly Andy Williams, and I'll be talking about Andy Williams later because my dad had the good fortune of seeing Andy Williams live before he passed away, so I want to ask him about that. But Andy Williams was in the house certainly during the early to mid 60s, and Johnny Mathis was a big artist.
Very, very popular then.
Yeah, Johnny was a big artist, and you had Perry Como during, these crooners, these singers in the early 60s. I remember you were a big Al Hirt fan. You had several of his records in your collection. I don't think this is one of them. I think I have another Al Hirt of yours.
Yeah, but I
remember you enjoying this.
One thing that influenced me as I sit here and Dave reflected on the albums is these people started appearing on television, and they reached the point where many of them had their own shows, an hour show at least once a week. Andy Williams had shows. Dean Martin was hilarious. He was not only a great singer, he was a comic, and he that's how I think he hooked up with Frank Sinatra. That they just kept teasing and joking with each other, and people loved their shows. They were faithful to him. We were faithful to watch once a week.
So in that early television era of the late 50s, early 60s, you might have saw them sing or do songs and say, oh, we got to pick up that record or pick up that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the personalities that would show through because they spent more than likely an hour on television.
Right.
And then they'd have special guests. They'd bring in other musicians and personalities, maybe movie stars, to fill the hour of the week.
So it's interesting how you went from your younger years in the 40s and early 50s to radio being the draw, to now TV's bringing you into all this music.
TV was very important. To this day, TV, I'm able, particularly on that public broadcasting station or stations, I see a lot of these artists over and over, and I'll replay it if I have an opportunity to see them.
Yeah. I know Jerry Vale was also one of these singers from that era, and he was big in our house. I know Mom loved him, and you did. Can you give any recollections of Jerry Vale?
Yeah, Jerry Vale became very popular because he really broke through coming to New England to play or to sing. And he had a great voice.
Yeah.
And he was from, I think, Jersey or New York. And he spent a lot of time in New England. And the population up here really took a serious liking to him. And then one time, as a group, we went to Las Vegas. And Jerry Vale had an interest in a smaller hotel or motel on the edge of the
strip,
strip, yeah. And he came down to meet us. He again, the influence of New England, or particularly Rhode Island. He loved Rhode Island. He came down and greeted us all, and had casual conversation with the group, and we were all excited and quite honored to have him do that.
Yeah, he's very famous
he
singer.
was a good. He is. I could still listen to his
He's
records.
got even I'm into rock and roll, but I occasionally enjoy listening because he's got such a good voice. And I know Mom liked the fact that he, being Italian, my mother's Italian, that he would sing Italian songs.
Yeah.
And with a lot of emotion and musical backing. And I know she really enjoyed some of his Italian-orientated music and songs. But yeah, he's a great one, and that's awesome that you got to meet him. Actually,
yeah,
it's amazing.
He made a point of coming. We didn't happen to run into him walking down the street. He came down to the motel and spoke to us, and he said he was very pleased that we would come to see him, and also to stay at his motel.
That's great. And all right, I'm going to move on a little bit to a different topic, and this is one where I come into the picture a little bit as far as my first love of music. And all of a sudden in 1964, my recollection is I'm a 3-year-old child, and out of the blue, and well, not out of the blue, I hope you'll explain it a little bit, but I remember as a young boy, the first 2 albums anyone ever gave me or bought for me were these 2 albums, and these are not the originals, actually, that my dad and Mom bought me, but these are facsimiles. These are both high-fidelity recordings of Meet the Beatles and A Hard Day's Night, the original. And my dad bought these for me back in '64. And I remember I'd be singing and dancing and bouncing on my toy spring horse to these albums and enjoying them. And I swear to this day, it was my doing that as a young child that made me such a fan of the Beatles and their music and their solo music to this day, and other bands and artists I've discovered also, but certainly the Beatles will always be my number one. So my question for you is, I have to ask this question, is why, here you and Mom are in '64, now your Mom's like 33, you're like 34 years old, so you're relatively young, but you're older, now you've got a family, you've started a family. What led you and Mom to buy these 2 Beatle albums for me, and well, first let me ask you that, and then I want to ask you what your thoughts were. Well, let me ask them together. What led you to buy these 2 albums for me, and what were your thoughts on the Beatles when they came to America in '64?
Well, I think it was, they were great musicians. They were talented, no question about that. And they certainly weren't fly-by-night. And as Dave mentioned a little earlier, he had a horse that had springs on it, a rocking horse, and it was a pinto pony, that's black and white mix, and he loved to ride that horse, and I guess hearing their music on the radio or possibly seeing some clips about them on television, we decided, that's the sound, the beat was important, and we ended up buying the records, and especially Hard Day's Night. I remember he wore that. That's why he doesn't have the record, probably because he wore it out, and he would bounce up and down for hours on the horse and listening to the Beatles, and I enjoyed them. I wasn't a fanatic about their music, but I recognized the fact that they were talented. And
you did see them that first time at Ed Sullivan at our uncle's house.
Oh yeah, I remember, I think one Sunday night, maybe it was the Ed Sullivan show, we came racing home from a visit to a family in Cumberland to our home, so we could see them. We didn't want to be late, so we were all excited in the car, my wife, myself, and the
other people,
and the kids,
and the family. What's funny is how you were older, though. You were 34 years old, and yet you had some interest in this young band from England. Something must have sparked you, to have that interest. At 34 years old.
There was always something about a group that I would like, and I enjoy listening repeatedly to their music, and to this day, I like the Beatles. I enjoy, and I know you spend a lot of time reminiscing about growing up with them, so to speak.
Yeah, oh yeah. So I got to show you this one, and this one's not an original, but this is one you had. You bought those too, and I enjoyed them, and I love your stories about that. But I just got to ask you if you have any recollection of this. Do you remember this was in your record collection? It's a knockoff type Beatles record. It's by another group, and they would record a bunch of songs, and then they would call it. You know, they might do two Beatles songs, like on this one they did "Please Please Me" and "She Loves You." It's not the Beatles, but it's called Beatlemania. And you had this in your collection in the '60s. And do you think you got duped into buying this, and you thought it was a Beatles record, or could you have specifically bought something like this?
I probably bought it because it reflected or touched on the Beatles.
Yeah.
And their what they had been doing, how famous they had become.
Yeah, because this was in your collection.
Yeah.
And it's not the Beatles, but it's a reasonable facsimile.
And I would probably
maybe unreasonable.
Still enjoy
yeah.
a record or a cut or two from that record.
Right, right. So there had to be something that drew you to it. But yeah, I always thought it was interesting how you had this in your collection. Then as I move away from the Beatles for a moment, I also remember having a lot of little singles. You had 45s around the house, and one specifically I remember playing over and over again was "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" by a group called the Fifth Estate during the 60s. I singles like that would be lying around the house. I also remember you having records, and you took me to this movie, Mary Poppins. I remember this was in the house.
Yeah.
This is your record, actually. I kept it.
Right.
But you had things like Mary Poppins, and I remember you taking me to the movie.
And the songs in the production, the movie would just click. You at least I would say, oh, that's a good song. I enjoy it. I would listen to it anytime it was played.
A lot of those movie tunes and show tunes are excellent. And you also took me to see Help, I remember, in '65. We went to see this movie.
I know we saw one of their movies in a drive-in. I remember that.
Yeah. I don't remember which one, but I do remember specifically seeing Help because it was in such vivid color as opposed to A Hard Day's Night was black and white. And I remember seeing this with you. Other things that were around the house also, we'd see a lot of sing-along with Mitch Miller. I remember you having this album. And also a big one around Christmas was Ray Conniff, Christmas.
Yeah.
But I remember you having these albums.
Both. Mitch Miller hit a point in time when he was really big. As far as any big band or group or individual soloist, for several years, Mitch Miller and his singers and orchestra, they were very, very popular. They sold a lot of records.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to show a couple more that you had lying around the house. This was one of your old Herb Alpert records. You remember this one?
Yeah.
Whipped Cream and Other Delights. It's a popular Herb Alpert.
He started out, they had the Tijuana Brass.
Yeah.
And then there was another group. I can't remember the name of it, but I saw him, I think a couple of times.
Wow, that's great.
Over a period of years at
different locations.
The music theater down in Warwick, Rhode Island. They would come. They had a tent there. And people would come in from all areas.
See, to this day, I still like Herb Alpert's music, and I listen to it a lot. And I would have loved to say I saw him live, with his band.
Very good.
Just a couple. These aren't really famous ones, but you had a lot of instrumental stuff in your collection, like this Kimo Sabe, the Electric Indian. This was
probably there had to be at least one song on that album
that you liked.
In that album that I liked.
Part of your collection.
Yeah. And they were probably riding high on the record.
This was in your collection too. It was the Love album. The great stars sing their great hits, and it's a variety. You get Jim Nabors, Doris Day, Steve Lawrence, Edie Gourmet, Jerry Vale, Percy Faith, Patti Page, Robert Goulet, and some Ray Conniff. So you must have just loved all those artists. And
well, what would happen is they would appear on many of the television shows as a special guest because of a certain record, and they were riding high that time.
Right.
At that time, as far as their stardom.
So this was a nice compilation where
Yeah,
you got a nice variety of artists on
right.
here. So
And you
must
notice, like Doris Day, she started out as a band singer with the big bands, and then she ended up in movies. Patti Page. I saw Patti Page a couple of times. I remember once in Providence she came.
Did she sing Old Cape Cod when you saw
Yeah,
her?
oh, of course, of course.
Have to do that one.
Yeah.
So, okay. Let me see. I want to ask you real quick. Well, I've got some here. Just want to go through. My next question is, because we showed Ray Conniff earlier speaking about some of the stuff that was around the house, I'm just going to flip through a couple of quick Ray Conniff records, but I have to ask you, you owned like 20-something Ray Conniff albums at one point, and I know he was originally from the Attleboro, Mass area. That's one.
He was born in Attleboro.
He's from New England. He's from Massachusetts. So when did Ray Conniff become part of your musical taste, and what did you like about him?
Well, I like.
While you're speaking, I'll show some of his records.
I like to recall it. The way they would present the songs, they wouldn't sing. It was like a chorus.
Group of singers, yeah.
Chorus group singing, and I always enjoyed that. And I would bring them home, and my wife would say, "Oh, you bought another Ray Conniff record." And perhaps I was influenced by the fact that he was from Attleboro, because we eventually moved to South Attleboro as a family. And I think I bought as many of those albums as were available during those years. But it was the sound and the way he would produce the albums. Yeah. He was a very talented musician. I think he was a trombone player when he was, and he
Back
played in the
day,
big bands. Ray Conniff started out playing trombone, I believe, in the big band era.
I should note you bought a lot of your records in Boston at Jordan Marsh, which Jordan Marsh was to Boston what Macy's is to New York City.
Yeah.
Jordan Marsh was the department store with a big record department.
They had a great record department at that time, and then it just, one day after a number of years, it disappeared.
It goes away like all the things.
Because of the changes in television improving. Eventually, they ended up with cell phones.
Yeah. Well,
and the things they can do with cell phones, or as I call them, they're not cell phones now, but they can do everything but make the bed.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now I want to talk about when the transformation happens as we get into the late 60s, early 70s. More modern or contemporary pop music and rock music was showing up in your collection, yours and Mom's collection. I'll just show a few quick ones, like The Fifth Dimension you had, and you had an album, this one by Santana. This is yours, by the way. I'm showing a lot of his originals. Right. You had some Creedence Clearwater Revival.
It had to be a song or more than one, perhaps, in that album that I really liked.
This is your Youngbloods album. You had an album by the Youngbloods.
Yeah.
Certainly, this one was played a lot in the house. Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits.
Sly. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, you had this.
Their beat, the music they produced, that was really good.
Yeah. And you had some show albums even. You had Hair. This is your Hair. And this is your Godspell. You had these two in your collection.
It would
modern.
Again, certain songs in those shows or productions would be of great interest.
And really surprised was you even had this Who album in your collection.
Yeah.
With them after they peed all over the concrete.
Yeah.
Which was controversial at the time, but it's a great one. It's lauded now as one of the greatest rock and roll albums of all time.
Yeah, and it's probably
interesting that you had it.
Heard about that, how great the album was, and also there was a song or more than one song that I enjoyed.
And you were turning 40 when this album came out. You were turning 40. You were 39 or 40.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat that you were that old and yet you still would purchase something like this. So Yeah, so basically, I got to ask you, what do you know what the impetus for the change was? Like in that late, coming into the later '60s, early '70s, what made you start purchasing things like this and
Well, I
Sly and Family
continually
Stone?
always listen to the radio, and
Yeah,
even though television was so important or so enormous in people's lives,
right.
I still listen to the radio and music. Even to this day, I put music on the television. I go into that group that group setting where they you don't have ads; they just have music,
Right,
and I
right.
enjoy listening
You
to
enjoy that? Yeah, I know you do. I hear you every day listening. Like I've said in some of my past videos, folks, a day almost doesn't go by where I don't listen to some form of music for at least a few minutes, and my dad's very much like that. Got music going all the time. I got to ask you, a lot of that music too, like all this, when you switch to buying more contemporary, modern pop and rock and roll for being in your late 30s, early 40s, a lot of it did seem also, though, still harkening back to your younger years, have a lot of brass in it and
right.
big band kind of styles like Dorsey and Glenn Miller and that. And these are two of your original albums right here that I have that are clear examples of that,
Yeah,
with brass and big sound and saxophones and trumpets.
yeah.
And do you think that, so my question, do you think that was buying these kind of records was due to also to your earlier love of that big band Dorsey sound?
Yeah,
You like the
but
brass and
just the sound that Chicago had, or Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I enjoy it. Even now, if I hear one of these records or one of these songs, enjoy listening to
you
it.
still enjoy that?
I
Yeah,
never tire of it.
yeah, that's
I've never
great.
been big in opera, but otherwise, music-wise, I'll listen to most anything, and much of it I'll enjoy.
Hmm. Okay, with that, I'm going to end part two right now. We've taken it up now, coming into the early '70s. So I'm going to end there, and I hope you'll come back for the next segment. Thanks a lot. We'll be back.